Hello again, class, and welcome back to Macbeth. Uh, Before we go to Act 3, Scene 2, I wanted to point out the soliloquy from Act 3, Scene 1 that I did not touch upon as much as I should have in the last video. I realized that in hindsight. So when Macbeth in Act 3, Scene 1, right, has the servant go to get the murderers around line 50, we have a very important soliloquy that reflects how things have not gone according to plan. And again, it was not logical for him to do what he did. So we see here when looking at his identity, yes, he changed his identity from Thane of Cawdor and Glamis to king, but it was not logical. He used duplicity, right? He lied, he cheated, he stole, he murdered. What's fair is foul. He was foul. He played most foully for it, as Banquo said. So we see here that his identity change has not benefited him. In fact, he's being plagued by anxiety and paranoia and insomnia and various psychological conditions resulting from his guilt, from his unnatural act. He says, "To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royal nature reigns that which would be feared." Right? He hath a wisdom that doth guide his valor to act in safety. He's logical, right? He's kind of guarded in some ways. There is none but he whose being do I fear, and under him my genius is rebuked, as it said Mark Antony's was by Caesar, right? This idea that kind of my thought process to become king, to kill Duncan, I just did it all for him, right? He says he chid the sisters when they put when first they put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. Them prophet like they held him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren scepter in my grip. Really? Because you are king. But for him, he's now paranoid that his reign will not move on. Well, Occam's razor. What's the most simplest line of reasoning if you want your reign to move on? Well, you have to have a kid. Remember that speech with Lady Macbeth earlier, right? So again, his paranoia is so illogical, and that's essentially what paranoia is. It's an illogical emotion, right? He says, "For Banquo's issue have I filled my mind, put rancors in the vessel of my peace, only for them," right? And again, I wanted to point out as he's discussing with the murderers, he makes a very interesting point as he appeals to them. This idea that as right, who wears our health but sickly in his life, which in his death were perfect. Again, he kind of appeals to this idea that you're doing it for me. It's very interesting how he's able to persuade the murderers to do something that they know they shouldn't do, just like his wife was able to persuade him to do something which he knew that he should not have done. So let's kind of skip ahead. I just wanted to draw attention to that soliloquy yet again. It's a very important moment in the play for those of you that are looking at this play from an identity standpoint, either in SA3 or you may choose to examine this play for SA4. So I think that that it's a really important soliloquy, as are most. So we now get into the mindset of Lady Macbeth. In Act 3, Scene 1, we learned what Macbeth was thinking. Now we understand what she's thinking. What an interesting quote. "Naught's had, all spent, where our desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy." Notice the alliteration, the rhyme or emphasis. They've risked everything, yet they've gained nothing because they're not happy with the results of their illogical actions, right? He comes in. I mean, what a great way to summarize their situation. They'd almost rather be the person that got killed than actually, they say they'd rather, right? "'Tis safer to be that which we destroy." Again, recognizing it was an illogical act in the first place, now the consequences, right, are plaguing themselves on the Macbeth in some ways. So what does she say? Why do you keep alone of sorrow's fancies, right? Why do you keep thinking on these thoughts which should indeed have died, right? Things without all remedy should be without regard. What's done is done. Ooh, what an interesting quote. Now, in context, she's, reminding him that he needs to stop feeling guilty. But this quote is very interesting from a critical thinking standpoint. I think it's just a beautiful way of saying that modern day expression, get over it, right? When you tell someone to get over it, you're essentially telling them to stop worrying about something that's in the past that they can't change. Things without all remedy should be without regard. What's done is done. It's an interesting, beautiful way of saying it with that alliteration between the remedy and regard. I like that. What's done is done. And later on, she says, what is done cannot be undone. And boy, isn't that the truth. Now, how does he respond? We have scorched the snake, not killed it, right? And he kind of has this imagery of the paranoia, right? As the snake coming back to bite him. Ere we will eat our meal in fear and sleep in the affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. Better to be with the dead, whom we to gain our peace have sent to peace, down the torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy, right? Again, what a great description of paranoia, of anxiety, of the negative psychological conditions that are plaguing them as a result of their regicide. Remember, killing a king was a really big deal, right? So what does he say? Torture of the mind. Those of you that might be choosing to write about torture from a psychological perspective, as that is one of our abstract terms for essay 3. Malice domestic, right? This notion of terrorism can come from the inside as well as, we all agree, terrorism normally, right? We think of it as something that comes from the outside, but we had to expand the idea of terrorism by adding that adjective, domestic terrorism. He calls it malice domestic. In some ways, could you look at Macbeth as an example of domestic terrorism? Because he does, he terrorizes his people, both psychologically and physically. And that is not what a king is supposed to do. Terrorism is not supposed to come from within. We normally think of it as something from outside. So they continue to discuss. She says, sleek over your rugged looks, be bright and jovial amongst your guests tonight, because remember, everybody's coming over for dinner. This leitmotif again of what's fair is foul and foul is fair, right? Appearances versus reality, duplicity, right? And he says, yes, I will, right? And then she says, you have to stop talking like this, when he brings up Banquo again. And how does he respond? Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. Thou knowest that Banquo in his fleance lives. Full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. What a poetic way to talk about mental situations, mental illness, mental conditions, paranoia, anxiety, disorders, things of that nature, stresses. Full of scorpions is my mind. So again, you can definitely look at the characters from a psychological standpoint and analyze what psychological concepts and ideas and issues are affecting their identity because of what? Because of their illogical decision-making processes. And that once again is indicative of that idea of philosophical counseling. Remember, on page 60 in the book, philosophical counseling, right? The practitioner of this therapy teaches his clients critical thinking skills so they can avoid making illogical decisions. And that's essentially what I think we can recognize when we analyze Hamlet and Macbeth, and down the road when we analyze Othello. Again, the characters are indulging, right, their emotions, their illogical emotional appeals. Their decisions are being fueled by hubris. Instead of Occam's razor, they're using hidden assumptions. Instead of, right, Rogerian strategy and dialectical thinking, they're being very dogmatic in their thinking, very closed-minded, poisoning the well, if you would, in their fallacious appeals. So We see again here this notion of appearances, right? Let's then be thou jocund, right? Let's pretend everything's fine. And she says, "What's to be done?" And he doesn't want to tell her, right? And he said, what does he say? "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed." So now we see that while she was the premeditated creator of the previous murderous plans, right, to kill Duncan, now he's taking it upon himself. And he wants validation from her, right? "I don't want you to know till you're able to applaud the deed." Again, we see that as he said earlier, he's doing it all for her in some ways. So now we see he wants to continue to get that approval from her. And again, another psychological condition, right? Sociopath, psychotic. He is definitely, in some ways, has he becoming kind of an unthinking killer? Absolutely. His nihilism and his hubris is fueling that. So he says, "Thou marvelest at my words, but hold thee still," right? Because he's saying you seem surprised, right? You seem like thou marvelous when you marvel at something. Um, "Things bad begun make strong themselves by ill." What an interesting way to rationalize their behavior to himself, right? You seem surprised at, right? You're marveling at me, but hold thee still, but hold off your judgment, your questions. Why? Because things bad begun make strong themselves by ill. What an interesting point about the causal chain of evil and this notion that one act has an effect, which then has another effect, which has another effect. And for him, he thinks everything's going to be okay if he just keeps doing bad things, if he just keeps up the duplicity, the appearances versus reality. Again, it goes against his thought process earlier in the play when he said if this was just the be all and end all, and it's not. And we see the psychological effects plaguing him and his wife as a result of their illogical actions based on fallacious appeals, hidden assumptions, and fueled by their hubris. I hope you found this helpful. As always, get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks for watching and listening.